I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to let you go. Those are the words that most people dread hearing from one of their employers. But what if you're a shareholder? What if you have a membership interest inside of an LLC? Can you be fired? The answer is, yeah, you could. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you lose your ownership interest or shareholder interest in a corporation. And in fact, the process can be much more complicated. If you don't have an employment contract, if you don't have a shareholder agreement that calls for how the shares or the membership interest in an LLC for an operating agreement would dictate what the result ultimately would be, the answer is most of the time you can't be removed from your ownership position, though there is the possibility that you can be fired. If you want to go the extra step and say, not only are you fired, but we also want to buy back your interest or we don't want you to be a part of the company, there are mechanisms to force shareholders or members out of an LLC, but that's going to be heavily dependent on the agreements that exist and to the extent the agreements are silent, on the laws of that particular state. And every state has laws. They have a corporation code. Sometimes they have a closely held corporation code if you have a closely held company. They have a limited liability act if it's an LLC. And then they have other laws that affect other business entity forms like general partnerships and those kinds of things, which are pretty uncommon nowadays. But they exist, right? Professional corporations, they exist. And so once you fire an employee that is also a shareholder, they may still remain as shareholders. They may still remain as members. So you have to be certain that when you're making a move like that, you just can't force them out. It's not that easy, and it's a much more complicated process. And so what can end up happening is now you have a very disgruntled person who remains on as an owner that has some power, and although they may not be an employee of your company, they sure have power when they vote. So you have to be very mindful of that differentiation that people can have many hats in a business. They could be an employee and earning W-2 income. They could be an officer or director of the business, meaning they have powers of directorship in a corporation, or they're officers like a chief executive officer or chief marketing officer or chief operating officer or even a vice president of a company. And then they have their ownership interests, the shares, the LLC membership interest, and those types of things. And those are three separate hats that really are separate and distinct and have to be treated in separate ways. So it ain't so easy to just say you're fired, especially if a person's a shareholder or a member, because you may not be able to force them out.